The sound of Angela's heels echoed through the cold corridors of St. John Hospital. It was a busy morning, as usual. Chief physician of the hospital, Angela was already accustomed to the pressure, but her firm demeanor concealed the sleepless nights and the constant worry for her patients' well-being. Even after years in the highest position of the medical team, Angela still remembered her days as a nurse, where hard work was the only constant, and humility was her greatest ally. With a steady hand, Angela adjusted her lab coat, hiding the medical director badge. She often did this when walking through the wards, a strategy to avoid the preferential treatment that many in her position received. It was important for her to be seen as part of the team, not as some untouchable figure. As she passed the ward, she heard the familiar sound of coughing and respiratory machines. Angela's sharp gaze swept the room and soon found one of the nurses, Raquel, struggling to manage the workload. Without hesitation, Angela approached. "Do you need help, Raquel?" Angela asked, her voice calm and controlled. Raquel looked up, surprised, recognizing Angela. The nurse hesitated, but the exhaustion on her face spoke for her. "That would be great, doctor. I have 3 patients in critical condition, and Dr. Malcolm keeps ordering constant tests. I can't keep up with everything." The name, Dr. Malcolm, sparked a flicker of irritation in Angela. She knew the doctor well. Malcolm was brilliant but arrogant, the kind who saw the hospital as a stage for his own talent show. He never had much respect for nurses and often treated them as mere assistants. Even Angela, as the director, had experienced his disdainful attitude. "I'll take over for a while, Raquel. I'll cover your nursing duties." Raquel opened her mouth to protest, but Angela was already picking up the chart of the nearest patient. She knew many would be shocked to see the medical director assuming nursing duties, but Angela was never the type to care about status. As she adjusted the monitoring equipment for a critically ill patient, she heard heavy footsteps approaching. It was Malcolm, always with an arrogant posture, his cold and analytical gaze sweeping the room. When he saw Angela by the patient's bedside, a look of disdain crossed his face. "Where are the nurses when you need them?" he asked scornfully, without recognizing Angela at that moment. "You there, see if you can prepare the blood tests now. I'm already late." Angela remained composed. She knew Malcolm hadn't realized who she was since her badge was hidden. He treated her like an ordinary nurse, dismissing her as he did with everyone he considered inferior. She took a deep breath, resisting the urge to respond in the same tone. "Of course, doctor. I'll get that done right away." Her tone was neutral, almost cold, but inside, Angela felt the humiliation eating away at a piece of her dignity. Dr. Malcolm left the room, muttering something about the nursing staff's incompetence, without even glancing at her. Angela, however, kept her cool, adjusting the 4 of another patient while her heart raced faster than usual. Malcolm's words echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing back on what truly mattered, patient care. Raquel returned to the room, relieved to have managed the lab work and medical orders. When she noticed the tense atmosphere Angela was trying to mask, her grateful expression shifted to concern. "Is everything okay?" Raquel asked. Angela offered a brief, but unconvincing smile. "Yes, Raquel. Everything's under control." Deep down, Angela knew something had to change in that hospital. The arrogance of doctors like Malcolm was starting to affect the work environment in an unbearable way. Nurses and other staff members suffered daily from the contempt of those who were supposed to be their partners. Angela had endured many situations like this, but she knew the incident from that morning couldn't be ignored. Action needed to be taken. As she finished her shift in the ward, the decision was already clear in her mind: she would report Malcolm's behavior to the hospital administration. It wasn't just about her own dignity, but the dignity of the entire team that faced that hostile environment daily. The administration corridor at St. John Hospital always seemed longer and more intimidating when Angela walked down it. It wasn't the grandeur of the building, but the weight of the decisions she knew she would have to make upon crossing those doors. That morning, however, the determination in her steps was stronger than any fear. The incident with Dr. Malcolm couldn't be swept under the rug. Angela had spent a sleepless night, replaying every detail of the humiliation she had suffered and thinking about how that toxic culture affected not only her but all the staff. It was time to act. The meeting room door was slightly ajar when she arrived. Inside, the hospital's administrative board was already discussing the day's matters. Angela took a deep breath and knocked softly before entering. "Good morning, everyone," she said, with a controlled smile. "We need to discuss an urgent matter." The general director, Dr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a perpetually worried expression, looked at her with surprise. "Angela, I didn't know you'd be attending today's meeting. What's going on?" She walked to the front of the room, feeling the curious gazes of the other board members. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. "Something serious is happening at the hospital. And I think all of you need to know," she began, her voice firm. Angela described the incident from the previous morning, detailing Malcolm's disrespectful behavior, her public humiliation, and the constant disdain he showed toward nurses and other staff members. The expressions on the board members' faces changed as she spoke, from curiosity to shock, and in some cases, discomfort. Thompson cleared his throat, visibly uneasy. "Angela, you are our medical director. And we know Dr. Malcolm is a talented professional. Don't you think this could be a personal issue between the two of you?" he asked, trying to keep a neutral tone. Angela felt her stomach churn. Personal? She thought about how many times she had heard that argument, used to discredit legitimate complaints. But she knew she couldn't let that narrative take hold. "This isn't a personal matter, Dr. Thompson," she responded, controlling the anger that threatened to surface. "This is a structural problem. It's not the first time I've received complaints about Dr. Malcolm's behavior, and I've personally witnessed him treating other staff disrespectfully. This can't continue. We work in a healthcare environment. Respect is the foundation of the care we provide to patients, and that starts within the hospital, among all of us." The room fell into a tense silence. The board seemed divided between those who agreed with Angela and those who preferred to maintain the status quo, especially when it came to a doctor like Malcolm, whose reputation was built on medical results, not on human interactions. Dr. Thompson stroked his beard, reflecting for a moment. "I understand your concerns, Angela. But we can't take drastic measures without a proper investigation. Do you have proof of this behavior? Documented reports from other staff members?" He gave her a challenging look, as if expecting Angela to back down in the face of the situation's complexity. But she didn't. "I do," she replied firmly. "I've already asked the nursing staff to document incidents, and now it's time to bring this to light. Moreover, I'm not asking for immediate punishment, but for the hospital to implement training programs to address hierarchical and racial biases. We need to create an environment where everyone, regardless of their position, is treated with respect." Murmurs began among the board members. Angela observed the faces around her. Some seemed to support her words, while others remained unreadable. Dr. Thompson, on the other hand, appeared to be calculating the implications of what she was suggesting. Investing in training programs meant time, money, and for many, dismantling old practices that had long been entrenched in the hospital. Training programs, he repeated, still hesitant. Do you really believe that would solve the problem? Angela nodded, sensing this was a crucial moment. She knew she was risking her own position, but also that the system wouldn't change without decisive action. Not only would it solve the problem, she said, but it would transform our team. We want to be a hospital of excellence, right? That doesn't just mean being the best in technology or diagnostics, but also in human terms. We need to train our professionals to recognize and combat biases, both hierarchical and racial. Only then can we improve the environment and the quality of care we provide. The silence hung in the air again, but this time there was something different about it. Angela felt that her words were truly being heard. The board members exchanged glances, and a few subtly nodded, as if they were starting to accept the logic behind her proposal. Finally, Dr. Thompson leaned forward, crossing his hands on the table. We're going to need time to discuss this. Angela, I want you to present a detailed plan at the next meeting. If we can implement this efficiently, we might be able to move forward. Angela took a deep breath, relieved, but aware that this was only the first victory. The hospital's culture wouldn't change overnight, and she knew that facing prejudice wouldn't be easy, especially in such a hierarchical environment. Even so, she left the room with the sense that something important had begun. In the hallway, Raquel was waiting for her with an anxious look. So, how did it go? Angela smiled briefly, feeling exhaustion wash over her. It was a start, she replied. A start. As she walked toward the elevator, her phone vibrated in the pocket of her lab coat. A text message from an unknown number: "Be careful, Angela. Not everyone wants to see changes." She stopped, her heart racing. What did that mean? And who could have sent it? Angela froze in front of the elevator, the glow from the phone's screen blinding her thoughts. Be careful, Angela. Not everyone wants to see changes. The words, stark and direct, echoed in her mind. Who could have sent that? And, more importantly, why? She looked around, sensing an invisible presence watching her, though the hallways were empty. She put the phone back in her pocket, trying not to show the internal storm brewing inside her. The elevator arrived with a soft metallic sound. Angela stepped in and pressed the button for the top floor, where her office was. Once alone, she felt the weight of the day finally hit her. The partial victory in the board meeting should have lifted her spirits, but now a new layer of uncertainty and paranoia began to form. The elevator doors opened, and Angela stepped out into the corridor leading to her office. The air felt heavier than usual, or perhaps it was just her imagination. Her hands trembled slightly, and she could barely hide her growing anxiety. She decided to focus on work. It always helped. Paperwork, reports, medical decisions, those always provided a temporary distraction. In her office, the morning light filtered through the blinds, creating patterns that danced across the wooden desk. Sitting down, she opened the drawer and pulled out some reports on new training programs. It was time to start drafting the plan she would present to the board. She knew this was a crucial step, but now there was something more hanging in the air, something she couldn't quite control. As she read, the phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. The name on the screen made her stomach turn, Dr. Malcolm X. Angela hesitated for a second before answering, mentally preparing for what was to come. Angela, Malcolm began, with no pleasantries, I need to speak with you as soon as possible. Come to my office. The cold, authoritative tone of Malcolm was as familiar as ever, but now Angela sensed something more sinister in his words. Perhaps he had heard about the meeting. She knew she would have to confront him sooner or later, but hadn't expected it to be this soon. She could refuse, but knew that if she did, he would use it against her. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," she responded, keeping her voice steady. Malcolm hung up without another word, leaving Angela with the unsettling feeling that something dark was approaching. She stood up, put on her lab coat, and walked through the corridor, now filled with doctors, nurses, and patients. The faces around her, usually familiar, now seemed distant, almost indifferent. She knew many wouldn't agree with the changes she was proposing, especially the more senior doctors like Malcolm. The hospital had its own power dynamics, and Angela was challenging decades of hierarchy. That, of course, came with a price. When she arrived at Malcolm's office, the door was slightly ajar. She knocked softly before stepping in. "Come in," Malcolm's impatient voice called out. Angela pushed the door open and entered. Malcolm's office was as cold as he was. Medical books perfectly aligned, awards and certificates adorning the walls, and a meticulously organized desk. Malcolm sat behind it, his eyes fixed on a report. He looked up at Angela, his eyes gleaming with a mix of irritation and superiority. "I've been informed about what you presented to the board this morning," he began, without preamble. Angela crossed her arms, standing firm. "It was necessary, Malcolm. The work environment is becoming unbearable for many here, including doctors and nurses. We need to address these issues head-on." Malcolm let out a dry, humorless laugh as he rose from his chair. "Unbearable," he repeated, as if the word were absurd. "Angela, you're a doctor, not a social activist. We're here to save lives, not play psychologists with the staff. I think you're losing sight of what really matters." Angela felt her anger rising, but she kept it under control. She knew this was exactly what he wanted, to provoke her until she lost her temper. "Saving lives also means ensuring that our team works cohesively and respectfully, Malcolm. This isn't about psychology, it's about creating a workplace where everyone can do their best without being humiliated or disrespected." Malcolm walked over to the window, staring outside, his hands clasped behind his back. "You think the hospital is going to spend money on training programs just because a few nurses feel bad about the tone doctors use?" He turned to face her, a cynical smile on his lips. "Is that what we're talking about here, Angela? The team needs to toughen up, not be coddled with sensitivity courses." Angela took a deep breath. She was tired of that mindset, the resistance to anything that could suggest even a bit of empathy and humanity in the workplace. But she knew she needed to be strategic. "The board is already considering the changes, Malcolm. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not." Malcolm narrowed his eyes, his expression growing darker. "Be careful with the enemies you're making, Angela," he said in a low, almost threatening tone. "You may be the medical director, but that doesn't mean you're immune to the consequences of your actions." Angela felt the weight of his words. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. She knew that Malcolm held influence in the hospital, and many respected him for his medical competence, but his arrogance and disdain were beginning to spread throughout the hospital like a silent disease. She stood up, meeting his gaze directly. "The difference between us, Malcolm, is that I'm not afraid of the consequences. I do what I believe is right to improve this hospital. And you can threaten me all you want, but you won't make me back down." She left the room before he could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had crossed a line, but she had no choice. Something deep and corrupt was rooted in that hospital, and now she felt the weight of it more than ever. What she didn't know was how far the repercussions of her actions might go. As she walked back to her office, her phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message. "You're treading on dangerous ground. Stop now before it's too late." Angela stopped in the middle of the hallway, feeling a chill run down her spine. It was now clear that someone was watching her every move. But who? And why? The sudden cold that ran through Angela as she read the message wasn't just from the threat. There was something more, a feeling that the shadows around her were closing in. She put the phone away with trembling hands, trying to focus on her work, but her mind was already consumed with uncertainty. Who was behind these messages? Was it just Malcolm, or was there something bigger happening behind the scenes at the hospital? Back in her office, Angela carefully closed the door, as if the outside world had suddenly become a constant threat. She sat at her desk, glancing over the reports she was trying to focus on, but her concentration was shattered. Something was rotten in that hospital, and she knew she was now in too deep. A knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, Raquel entered, her face filled with concern. "Angela, are you okay?" the nurse asked, closing the door behind her. "I heard you had a tense meeting with Dr. Malcolm." Angela smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension. "I'm fine, Raquel. What's going on?" Raquel hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of how to approach the subject. "I've heard rumors during the afternoon shift that someone's trying to undermine you. Some of the doctors are unhappy with the changes you've proposed and, well, that includes Dr. Malcolm." Raquel paused, looking directly at Angela. "Angela, have you received any strange messages?" Angela felt her stomach drop. How did Raquel know about those messages? Was the nurse more involved in this than Angela had realized? "Why are you asking that?" Angela asked, cautiously. Raquel sat down across from her, her worried expression now turning into something more serious. "Angela, I saw what they did to the last doctor who tried to change things here. Dr. Samuel. He also tried to implement training programs, but they focused on patient safety. He started getting anonymous threats, calls in the middle of the night, until one day, he simply resigned. Left the hospital and disappeared. No one has heard from him since." Angela remained silent, absorbing that information. Samuel. She vaguely remembered hearing his name, but she never knew what had really happened. Could the same thing be happening to her? "And you think it's happening again?" Angela asked in a low voice, as if she feared any word could be overheard by invisible ears. Raquel nodded, her expression filled with a gravity that left Angela even more unsettled. "You're a threat to them, Angela. Not just because you want to change the system, but because you have the power to do it. They know that if you keep pushing forward, many of the privileges some doctors enjoy will disappear. And they won't let that happen easily." Angela felt a mixture of frustration and anger. It wasn't fair that an environment that should be dedicated to care and respect was being corroded by such dirty power games. She had fought her whole life to get to where she was, and she wasn't going to give up because of a few veiled threats. "I need to know who's behind this," Angela said, her voice renewed with determination. "And I need proof. I can't just accuse people without anything concrete." Raquel sighed, shaking her head. "That's going to be hard. They know how to protect themselves. What happened to Dr. Samuel was all very discreet. They didn't leave any traces. Only fear remained. Even so, I have to try. If I do nothing, they'll keep getting away with it, and the hospital will never change. Angela stood up, the resolve clear in her eyes. I'm going to find out who's behind these messages and bring it to the board. Raquel watched her for a moment, clearly impressed by the medical director's courage. Yet there was still genuine concern in her voice when she spoke. Be careful, Angela. They're not playing around. Angela nodded, trying to reassure her, but inside, she felt the weight of Raquel's words. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she had no choice. If she backed down now, all the work she had done to get to this position would have been in vain. Raquel left the office, leaving Angela alone with her thoughts. Silence filled the room again, but now it felt oppressive. Angela felt like she was being watched, even when there was no one around. Without wasting any time, she picked up the phone and called one of the hospital's technicians, someone she had trusted since her early days as director. Hugo, it's Angela. I need a favor. Hugo was one of the people responsible for the hospital's security technology, a discreet and efficient man. If anyone could help her find out more about the messages she had been receiving, it would be him. Of course, Doctor. How can I help? He replied from the other end of the line. Angela took a deep breath before speaking. I need you to check if there are any records of messages from an unknown number in the hospital's security system. Is there any way you can trace the last messages that were sent to me? There was a pause on the other end, and Angela could sense Hugo's uncertainty. Well, Doctor, that might be tricky. The privacy of the staff is something we take very seriously. But I can try to see what I can do. It'll take some time, and I might not be able to track everything, but I'll get back to you as soon as I have something. Thanks, Hugo. This is confidential. Just between us. Angela hung up, feeling a slight sense of relief knowing that someone was working on it. But the relief was short-lived. The anonymous messages, Raquel's warning, the mysterious history of Dr. Samuel, all of it wove a web of secrets that she still couldn't untangle. And time was running out. Late in the afternoon, Angela decided to leave the hospital early. She needed a break, a moment to process everything. As she stepped outside, the fresh air felt like a brief relief from the tension, but only for a moment. The weight of the situation still lingered, present in every step. As she walked toward her car, Angela felt something strange, as if she were being followed. She looked around, but the parking lot was nearly empty. Only a few staff members were leaving after their afternoon shift. Her heart raced, and she quickened her pace, reaching the car and getting in quickly. She locked the doors and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the paranoia. But when she started the car and the headlights illuminated the asphalt in front of her, a figure appeared in the reflection of the rearview mirror. A man in a dark coat, standing by one of the pillars in the parking lot, staring directly at her. Panic took over for a second, but when she looked again, the man was gone. Angela sped out of the hospital parking lot, her heart still pounding. The image of that mysterious man standing in the shadows still lingered in her mind. Although he had disappeared quickly, the fear his presence had triggered remained intense. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if every move she made was being carefully monitored. As she drove through the city streets, the tension in her body didn't lessen. She felt trapped, surrounded by invisible forces operating inside and outside the hospital. There was no longer any doubt, her actions had triggered a far more serious and threatening response than she had ever imagined. But the question hammering in her mind was, who was behind all of this? When she arrived home, Angela parked in the garage and sat in the car for a moment, trying to regain her composure. The house was quiet, the living room lights on, but there was no sign of movement. When she entered, she was greeted by the soothing sound of low classical music coming from the sound system. Her husband, Marcos, must have been around. She found him in the kitchen, preparing something light for dinner, as he usually did when she got home early. "You got home early today, love," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a calm smile. "Everything okay at the hospital?" Angela wanted to respond casually, but the fatigue and stress of the day weighed too heavily on her shoulders. "It was a complicated day," she replied as she dropped her bag on the table and sat down. "And things might get more complicated." Sensing the seriousness in her tone, Marcos came closer, concerned. He knew Angela's work had been getting more intense in recent weeks, but this was the first time he saw fear so clearly in her eyes. "What's going on, Angela?" She sighed, feeling like she could no longer hide the gravity of the situation. She told him about the anonymous messages, Malcolm's behavior, and the veiled threats that now seemed to surround her from all sides. Marcos listened carefully, without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail Angela revealed. "Do you think they would really do something to you?" he asked, his voice grave. "This sounds like more than just a power struggle, Angela. This sounds like a conspiracy." Angela nodded, feeling the same. She knew the resistance to change in the hospital would be strong, but she hadn't imagined she'd be the target of such an aggressive campaign to silence her. "I don't know how far they're willing to go," she replied, staring into the distance, trying to organize her thoughts. "But what I do know is that I can't give up now. If I do, everything I've fought for will have been for nothing." Marcos took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "You know I'm with you, Angela. But we need to come up with a plan. We can't underestimate what's happening." Angela agreed, but the problem was she still didn't know how to fight something she couldn't see. The messages, the threats, the mysterious figure in the parking lot, everything seemed like part of a carefully orchestrated plot to undermine her, but who was at the center of it all? After dinner, Angela went to the home office and turned on her computer. There was a growing sense of urgency. She needed to piece everything together before it was too late. She opened her email inbox and found a new message from Hugo, the hospital's security technician. The message was brief, but tense enough to leave her unsettled. "Angela, I managed to track down some information about the messages. Come to the hospital early tomorrow morning. I need to show you something in person. Don't send anything via email. Hugo." Angela felt a chill down her spine. If Hugo was worried about sharing information through email, that meant the situation was more serious than she had imagined. But what could he have discovered? The next morning, Angela arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The building was still quiet, with only a few staff members moving through the corridors. She met Hugo in the security control room, a small hidden room in the basement, where the cameras and monitoring systems were managed. Hugo had a serious expression when she entered. "What did you find?" Angela asked, without wasting time. Hugo gestured for her to come closer to one of the screens. He clicked on a few files and opened a security video from the hospital's parking lot. "This was captured last night, just before you left the hospital," he said, pressing play. Angela watched the empty parking lot, until the camera captured a man in a dark coat, exactly like the one she had seen in the rearview mirror. The man walked through the parking lot, stopping for a moment next to one of the pillars, exactly where she had seen him. He seemed to be waiting for something but soon disappeared from the camera, walking out of range. "It's him," Angela said, her throat tightening. "That's the man I saw." Hugo nodded, but his expression indicated there was more. "That's not all. I managed to trace some of the messages you received. Most were sent from a masked number, but I was able to detect the origin of one of them, and it came from inside the hospital." Angela felt her heart race. From inside the hospital? "Who's doing this?" she asked, now feeling the tension rise. Hugo shook his head, uncertain. "I'm not sure yet, but everything points to someone in the administration being involved. Whatever's going on, it's big enough that people inside the hospital want to keep it buried. And you, Angela, you're digging too deep." Angela was silent for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a power struggle between doctors. It was something much bigger, and now she was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that threatened not only her career but her safety as well. "What do I do now?" she asked, more to herself than to Hugo. Hugo looked at her seriously. "You need allies. If you're going to face this, you can't do it alone. But most importantly, you need to protect yourself. We don't know how far these people are willing to go to silence you." Angela knew he was right. From that moment on, every step would have to be calculated with extreme caution. The power play inside the hospital had become deadly, and now she needed more than courage to face it. As she left the security room, Angela felt that a new phase had begun. She was no longer just dealing with arrogance and abuses of power. Now, she was caught in a dangerous scheme, where trusting the people around her could be her downfall. Still, she wasn't ready to give up. She would find out who was behind all of this, and when she did, everyone would know the truth. Angela climbed the hospital stairs with a growing sense that the ground could collapse at any moment. Hugo's information confirmed that the danger was closer than she had imagined, and the worst part was knowing that those responsible for the threats weren't far away. They were inside the hospital. The place that, for so many years, had been her refuge, was now the epicenter of a dangerous and dark conspiracy. She knew she had to act with extreme caution. The next few hours would be decisive. Who could be her ally? And perhaps more importantly, who was against her? Entering her office, Angela closed the door carefully and allowed herself a moment to think. Her phone buzzed occasionally with messages, and her email was overflowing with urgent appointments and documents, but none of that mattered now. The threats were starting to take a clearer shape. A hidden circle of power was moving behind the hospital's decisions, and she was standing in their way. She sat down, staring at the city skyline through the window as her thoughts began to organize. One thing was certain, Malcolm was at the center of it all. He had always been part of the hospital's elite, moving with influence and arrogance, but now Angela could clearly see that he was protecting something bigger. Something that couldn't be touched or revealed. Before she could continue reflecting, a discreet knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Raquel, once again. The nurse entered slowly, but this time her face showed a different kind of tension. "Angela, can we talk?" Raquel asked, closing the door behind her and quickly sitting down. "I just heard something you need to know." Angela's heart started to race. Every conversation now seemed loaded with danger. "What happened?" she asked, leaning slightly forward in her chair. Raquel took a deep breath, as if carefully choosing her words. "I was in the nurses' lounge, and a conversation caught my attention, between two doctors. They were talking about a secret meeting happening tonight, outside the hospital. Dr. Malcolm's name was mentioned a few times." Angela felt the tension rise in her chest. "What kind of meeting?" she asked, trying to remain calm. Raquel looked around, as if afraid someone might be listening. They said something about resolving the problem at the hospital once and for all. Angela. I think they're talking about you. Raquel's words hit Angela like a punch to the gut. Resolve the problem? The puzzle pieces started to fit together in a terrifying way. What once seemed like veiled threats was now turning into concrete action to remove her from the hospital, perhaps in a definitive way. Do you know where this meeting will be? Angela asked, keeping her voice low. Raquel nodded. I overheard something about a restaurant downtown. A discreet place where they can talk without being disturbed. Angela stayed silent for a moment, processing the information. If that were true, she would be in serious danger. But what if this was her only chance to expose what was happening? If she could find out more about what Malcolm and the others were planning, she would have the power to defend herself and, perhaps, save the hospital from that web of corruption. I'm going there, Angela said firmly. Raquel looked at her, wide-eyed with surprise. You can't be serious. If they're really talking about you, this could be dangerous. Raquel whispered, now visibly scared. Angela shook her head. She knew it was risky, but she was already in too deep. There was no turning back. I need to find out what's going on, Raquel. I can't keep moving blindly. If Malcolm and the others are plotting something, I need to be one step ahead. Raquel tried to protest, but she knew Angela was determined. She had always been like that, someone who didn't stop until the truth was revealed. Although Raquel was worried, she also felt admiration for that courage. Then you're not going alone, Raquel finally said. I'm going with you. Angela looked at Raquel, surprised, but at the same time grateful. She knew she couldn't trust many people inside the hospital, but Raquel had proven to be a loyal ally. They would do this together. Later that night, Angela and Raquel drove to the mentioned restaurant. It was a discreet place, located on a quiet street far from the city's busy spots. The dim lights from the windows gave the place an almost clandestine feel, perfect for a private meeting between people who didn't want to be seen. They parked at a safe distance and watched the activity. A few luxury cars were parked outside, and Angela immediately recognized one of them, Dr. Malcolm's car. This is the place, she said, her stomach twisting with nerves. Raquel nodded silently, glancing around apprehensively. They needed to be careful. They couldn't risk being seen. Angela pulled up the hood of her coat, trying to disguise herself as much as possible, and both women stepped out of the car, walking discreetly through the shadows until they found a spot where they could observe without drawing attention. From a distance, they could see Malcolm and two other men entering the restaurant, discreetly greeting the maitre d', before being led to a private room in the back. Angela tried to stay focused, controlling the adrenaline now surging through her body. What now? Raquel whispered, visibly nervous. Angela looked around, searching for a way to get closer without being seen. Then she spotted the solution, a small side door, likely used by the restaurant staff. We'll go through there, Angela said, pointing to the back entrance. They moved quickly toward the door, and, luckily, found it unlocked. They slipped into the restaurant unnoticed and followed a narrow hallway that led to the back area. The sound of male voices soon became audible. They were close to the room where Malcolm and the other men were talking. Angela and Raquel crouched by the slightly open door and began to listen to the conversation. She's becoming a much bigger problem than we expected, said a voice Angela recognized as Malcolm's. If Angela continues with these investigations and pushes for changes, the board will end up giving in. We need to resolve this soon. And how do you suggest we do that? Asked one of the other men. Malcolm remained silent for a moment, and Angela held her breath, waiting for the answer. "We'll make sure she has no choice but to leave on her own," he said in a grim tone. "And, if necessary, we'll make her disappear." A chill ran down Angela's spine. Make her disappear? What was Malcolm suggesting? Could they really be willing to go to such extremes? Raquel gently tugged at her arm, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here, Angela. Now." Angela knew Raquel was right. They had heard enough to know that the danger was real. Silently, the two retreated down the corridor, moving quickly toward the side exit where they had entered. Their hearts pounded with adrenaline, but they managed to leave without being seen. When they reached the car, Angela sat in the driver's seat, her hands trembling. "What are we going to do?" Raquel asked, her voice still shaking. Angela started the car, but before responding, she looked at the road, feeling the weight of everything they had just overheard. "Now we know they're willing to do anything. And I'm going to expose every single one of them." The drive back to the hospital was a blur in Angela's mind. The words she had heard in the restaurant echoed relentlessly, "We'll make her disappear." This was no longer just a power struggle, it was clear that Malcolm and the others were willing to eliminate any threat to their influence, and now she had become their primary target. The fear she had once felt, distant and nebulous, was now tangible, pressing against her chest with every heartbeat. Raquel sat silently beside her, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, still trying to process what they had just uncovered. Angela knew they needed to act fast. Time was running out, and the longer they waited, the more dangerous things could become. As soon as they reached the hospital, they parked in a discreet area of the lot, far from the main cameras. Angela still didn't know who she could trust inside, and any wrong move could alert Malcolm and his allies that she knew too much. She turned to Raquel, trying to appear firm despite the tension in her eyes. "We need to expose this now. We can't wait any longer. If they're willing to go this far, I can't risk being caught off guard." Raquel nodded, still visibly nervous. "But how are you going to do that, Angela? Malcolm has influence over a lot of people here, even on the board. If we try to take this directly to them, we might be discredited, or worse." Angela knew Raquel was right. Malcolm and his allies controlled not only key parts of the hospital, but they also held sway over administrative decisions. If she went to the board without solid proof, she could be accused of causing turmoil and end up being fired or silenced. "I'm going to need a bigger ally," Angela said, thinking. "Someone from outside the hospital, someone with enough power to start a real investigation. Maybe, the press." Raquel looked at her, surprised. "You want to involve the media? That could bring huge repercussions." Angela nodded, her expression determined. "It's the only way. If the press finds out what's happening here, they'll expose everything. Malcolm and the others will have nowhere to hide. And if we get solid evidence, we can force the board to act." Raquel still looked hesitant but knew Angela was right. They were alone inside the hospital. Without outside allies, the battle was lost before it even began. And what about proof? "We need something solid." Angela thought for a moment, then remembered the security cameras and the data Hugo had mentioned. "Hugo," she said, a glimmer of hope in her voice. "He can help us. He's already tracked some of the messages I received and identified communication patterns inside the hospital. If we can get access to more records, we can use it against Malcolm." They quickly got out of the car and headed back into the hospital. By this time, there were fewer people moving around, and the corridors were emptier. Angela kept her head down, with her coat's hood covering part of her face. They couldn't risk being seen by anyone close to Malcolm. Hugo was waiting for them in the security room in the basement, just as Angela had requested minutes earlier by message. He looked tense, clearly aware that the situation was escalating. "You shouldn't be here," he said as soon as they entered. "If anyone finds out we're messing with these records, they could make your life hell, Angela." Angela stepped closer to him, her determination clear in her eyes. "Hugo, we're already deep into this. I need all the help I can get now. If we don't do something, they'll get rid of me, and they won't hesitate to use any means to do so." Hugo sighed, shaking his head, but quickly began working, accessing the security files and the hospital's internal communication logs. "What do you need?" he asked, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I want all the records of messages and calls made by Malcolm and the board members in the last few weeks. Anything that can link these people to a conspiracy to remove me from the hospital." Hugo worked silently for a few minutes, while Angela and Raquel watched nervously. The small control room felt suffocating, and with each passing second, the sense of urgency grew. Finally, Hugo sighed and pointed at the screen. "Here. I have some conversations between Malcolm and 2 board members. They're clearly discussing ways to force you out, Angela. They mention meetings outside the hospital and even some suspicious financial transactions." Angela stepped closer, her eyes widening as she read the records on the screen. There it was, right in front of her, the evidence she needed. Malcolm and other members of the administration were involved in illegal activities to protect their interests and eliminate any threat to their influence. And now, she had the means to prove it. "Hugo, this is perfect," Angela said, feeling a spark of hope. "If we take this to the press, they won't be able to deny it. But I need copies of everything." Hugo nodded, quickly transferring the files to a flash drive and handing it to Angela. "This is all I can do," he said, with a serious expression. "But be careful. If they find out you have this, they'll try to stop you in any way they can." Angela knew he was right. She had just gotten what she needed, but now the real fight would begin. With the flash drive in hand, she felt the weight of responsibility. The people behind this plot were powerful, and she would have to be smarter to bring them down. "Thank you, Hugo," she said, carefully putting the flash drive in her pocket. "I couldn't have done this without you." He nodded, but his eyes still showed concern. "Just, take care, Angela. Don't trust anyone but the people you know are on your side." That same night, Angela drove to the office of a local investigative newspaper. It was a small independent paper known for exposing corporate and political scandals. Angela knew that if anyone could help her, it would be the reporter she had contact with, an experienced and relentless journalist who had already exposed other cases of corruption. When she arrived, she was greeted by Lucas, the journalist, who looked at her with curiosity and concern. He knew Angela wouldn't come to him unless it was something serious. "What's going on, Angela?" he asked, as he led her to a private room. Angela didn't waste any time. She handed him the flash drive and began to tell the whole story, from the threats she had received to the secret meeting at the restaurant and the evidence she now had in her hands. Lucas listened to everything in silence, his expression growing more serious as Angela revealed the details. "This is much bigger than I imagined," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, we're going to blow this case wide open in the headlines. This could shake the entire healthcare system." Angela nodded, but her face showed the exhaustion and accumulated tension. "I just want the truth to come out. And for those people to pay for what they've done." Lucas inserted the flash drive into his laptop and began examining the files. "I'll take care of this, Angela. We'll do it the right way. But you need to protect yourself. If Malcolm and the others find out you came to me, they'll escalate the threats." Angela knew he was right. Now that she had taken this step, there was no turning back. She was up against something much bigger than she had imagined, but she also knew that if she backed down, everything she had fought for would be lost. As she left the newspaper building, she felt the tension rising again. The circle was closing in. The days that followed her delivery of the flash drive to Lucas were a true test of endurance for Angela. Every movement in the hospital, every glance from a colleague, carried the sense that the noose was tightening. The air seemed heavier, filled with the knowledge that, at any moment, Malcolm and his allies could discover what she had done. The nights became long and sleepless, and the fear of being caught off guard at any moment was constant. Lucas had promised to contact her as soon as the story was ready for publication, but the silence that followed only increased Angela's anxiety. She knew that exposing such a powerful network of corruption wasn't something that could be done overnight, but the waiting was wearing down her patience and spirit. One cloudy, intense afternoon, Angela was in her office, reviewing medical reports without being able to truly focus, when her phone rang. Lucas' name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately. "Lucas? Any news?" "Yes, Angela," he replied, his voice serious. "The story will be published tomorrow. We've got everything we need to go live, but you should know things are going to get complicated. Are you ready for what comes next?" Angela's heart raced. She knew she was ready to face Malcolm and his network of influence, but the nerves were inevitable. She had entered this battle knowing the price could be high, but now she was about to face the consequences of her actions. "I'm ready," she said, trying to sound more confident than she really felt. "What should I do?" "Keep an eye on the hospital. Once the story goes live, it'll have an immediate impact. If everything goes well, the authorities will start investigating soon after, and Malcolm and the others will be forced to respond. But, you could be in danger until that happens." Angela thanked Lucas and hung up, knowing that time was running out. The truth was about to come out, but she needed to protect herself until justice could be served. The next day, the hospital was tense. Angela arrived early, as usual, but this time she felt something different in the air. The sound of whispers in the corridors, furtive glances, and tense faces, it was as if everyone was waiting for a storm to break. She walked to her office, and before she could sit down, the phone rang again. It was Raquel. "Angela," Raquel said urgently. "Have you seen it? The story's been published. It's in all the papers." Angela's heart raced. The truth was out. "I'll come to you," she said, quickly hanging up. Angela grabbed her things and left her office, heading toward Raquel's room, but what she saw along the way made her stop immediately. Malcolm. He was standing in the hallway, talking to two of the board members, the same ones Angela knew were involved in the conspiracy. His face, usually impassive and arrogant, now looked filled with barely contained rage. When his eyes met Angela's, she saw a flash of menace in them. He knew. Without saying a word, Angela looked away and quickened her pace toward the ward, where Raquel was waiting for her. As soon as she entered the room, she closed the door behind her, taking a deep breath. "They know," she said, breathless. "Malcolm looked at me like he knew everything." Raquel nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "The article is explosive, Angela. It talks about the corruption in the hospital, the threats, and even the suspicious financial transactions. They're cornered now. But I'm afraid of what they might do. Angela knew that the more desperate her enemies became, the more dangerous they would be. But she also knew she had come too far to back down now. It was time to face Malcolm and the others directly. "Raquel, I can't hide anymore. I need to confront them. Now that the truth is out, it's only a matter of time before justice starts to act. But until then, I need to make sure they don't do anything to me, or to any of us." Raquel hesitated for a moment but knew Angela was right. The confrontation was inevitable. "I'm coming with you," Raquel said firmly. "I won't let you face this alone." The days that followed Angela's delivery of the flash drive to Lucas were a true test of endurance. Every move in the hospital, every glance from a colleague, carried the sense that the noose was tightening. The air seemed heavier, filled with the knowledge that, at any moment, Malcolm and his allies might discover what she had done. The nights became long and sleepless, and the fear of being caught off guard was constant. Lucas had promised to contact her as soon as the article was ready for publication, but the silence that followed only increased Angela's anxiety. She knew that exposing such a powerful network of corruption wasn't something that could be done overnight, but the waiting was eating away at her patience and spirit. One cloudy, intense afternoon, Angela was in her office, reviewing medical reports without being able to truly focus, when her phone rang. Lucas' name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately. "Lucas? Any news?" "Yes, Angela," he replied, his voice serious. "The article will be published tomorrow. We've got everything we need, but you should know things are going to get complicated. Are you ready for what comes next?" Angela's heart raced. She knew she was ready to face Malcolm and his network of influence, but the nerves were inevitable. She had entered this battle knowing the price could be high, but now she was about to face the consequences of her actions. "I'm ready," she said, trying to sound more confident than she really felt. "What should I do?" "Keep an eye on the hospital. Once the article is out, it'll have an immediate impact. If all goes well, the authorities will start investigating soon after, and Malcolm and the others will be forced to respond. But, you might be in danger until that happens." Angela thanked Lucas and hung up, knowing that time was running out. The truth was about to come out, but she needed to protect herself until justice could be served. The next day, the hospital was on edge. Angela arrived early, as usual, but this time she felt something different in the air. The sound of whispers in the corridors, furtive glances, and tense faces, it was as if everyone was waiting for a storm to break. She walked to her office, and before she could sit down, the phone rang again. It was Raquel. "Angela," Raquel said urgently. "Have you seen it? The article's been published. It's in all the papers." Angela's heart raced. The truth was out. "I'm coming to you," she said, quickly hanging up. Angela grabbed her things and left her office, heading toward Raquel's room, but what she saw along the way made her stop immediately. Malcolm. He was standing in the hallway, talking to two of the board members, the same ones Angela knew were involved in the conspiracy. His face, usually impassive and arrogant, now looked filled with barely contained rage. When his eyes met Angela's, she saw a flash of menace in them. He knew. Without saying a word, Angela looked away and quickened her pace toward the ward, where Raquel was waiting for her. As soon as she entered the room, she closed the door behind her, taking a deep breath. "They know," she said, breathless. "Malcolm looked at me like he knew everything." Raquel nodded, her eyes full of concern. The article is explosive, Angela. It talks about the corruption in the hospital, the threats, and even the suspicious financial transactions. They're cornered now. But I'm afraid of what they might do. Angela knew that the more desperate her enemies became, the more dangerous they would be. But she also knew she had come too far to back down now. It was time to face Malcolm and the others directly. Raquel, I can't hide anymore. I need to confront them. Now that the truth is out, it's only a matter of time before justice starts to act. But until then, I need to make sure they don't do anything to me, or to any of us. Raquel hesitated for a moment but knew Angela was right. The confrontation was inevitable. I'm coming with you, Raquel said firmly. I won't let you face this alone. Together, Angela and Raquel walked through the hospital corridors to the administrative floor, where they knew Malcolm and the other board members would be. When they reached the main office, the atmosphere was already buzzing with the news. Doctors and staff exchanged worried glances, and some of the nursing team, whom Angela knew were on her side, watched expectantly. Angela opened the door to the meeting room without knocking. All eyes turned to her, and there they were, Malcolm, two other board members, and Dr. Thompson, the hospital's director, who seemed completely out of control of the situation. Angela, Thompson said, trying to sound authoritative, but the tension in his voice was obvious. Do you have something to say about this absurd accusation circulating in the media? Angela stepped forward, feeling every fiber of her body ready for the confrontation. This isn't an absurd accusation, Dr. Thompson. It's the truth. And all of you know it. Malcolm stood up, his eyes blazing with anger. You have no concrete proof, he shouted. This is all a ploy to destabilize the hospital. You're nothing but a frustrated doctor who didn't get what she wanted and now wants to bring us all down. Angela remained calm. This was exactly the kind of reaction she expected from him. The proof is with the press, Malcolm. And soon it will be in the hands of the authorities. There's no point in denying it anymore. Everything you've done, every maneuver to protect your interests, is about to be exposed. Angela paused, looking each of them in the eye. You might try to get rid of me, but now the whole world knows what you've done. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. The impact of Angela's words was palpable. Thompson looked pale, the other board members avoided her gaze, and Malcolm, his face red with rage, glared at her as if he was about to explode. This, Malcolm began to say, but was interrupted by the sudden arrival of two men in suits. Investigators. Dr. Malcolm X. Dr. Thompson, said one of the investigators as he showed his badge. We're from the public prosecutor's office. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding an ongoing investigation. Malcolm froze, unable to process what was happening. Thompson tried to argue, but the investigators had already taken control of the situation. Angela and Raquel stood silently, watching as the men were escorted out of the room. The downfall had begun. As the last board members were taken away, Angela allowed herself to breathe easily for the first time in days. She had done what needed to be done. It hadn't been easy, and she knew challenges still lay ahead, but now the hospital had a chance for real change. You did it, Raquel said, with a genuine smile. Finally, justice is being served. Angela looked at her friend, feeling a wave of gratitude and relief. We did it, Raquel. This never would have happened without you. Together, they left the meeting room, knowing that while the battle had been won, the work of rebuilding the hospital was just beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for following along with this thrilling story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends. Leave a comment below and let us know what you thought of the story. Your opinion is really important to us. And don't forget to watch the next video that's showing on your screen now. There's a lot of great content coming your way. See you next time.